I wrote something very, very short here, so I don't hijack the entire panel. What I want to convey here is basically that racism and all the inequalities that we see in our societies, they are not just anomalies or market imperfections, as we are taught in some economics courses. They are rooted in capitalism. They are expressions of the inner workings of capitalism. So we have this inequalities and racism as they result from centuries of racism, exploitation, expropriation, dispossession, and all those processes that black communities suffer for centuries. We have a very important example in Tulsa, what happened here with the black community. And I think that these systemic problems, they still happen in our society, and we need to find and understand the historical roots of these problems, because if we understand those roots and we can unfold the inner workings of capitalism, then we can propose some pathways to transform reality. So that's our role as heterodox economists, along with the community here, to basically understand and change reality. That's all I have. Now, Scott Carter.
Thank you, Bruno, and thank you for joining, and thanking our guests here for taking the time and trouble to come to Tulsa. Of course, Dr. Crutcher is from here. Drs. Mullen and Darity came and for the visit. I want to echo on what Bruno said. I think that the inequities and the inequalities are structurally embedded. It becomes a systemic nature of the way in which the system normally functions. And so I think that, and I'll just leave it at that. And I think that, to allow our speakers to speak. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for coming. Okay, cheers.
So Scott didn't introduce himself, but he's the chair of the economics department and member of the CHIT with us. Thank you so much. I'm Clara Mattei. I'm also a professor at the econ department at TU and the director of the center. The word heterodox might be new to many of you, and so I would just like to let you know that it is a word that is used to incorporate a plurality of lenses to understand the economy that are in a way critical of the dominating way in which we normally see the world. Economics has had a great responsibility in often concealing or justifying the status quo, a status quo that is, as we will learn tonight, and we very much know, grossly unjust for many reasons. So the spirit here is to say, well, knowledge can be very empowering if we can be courageous enough to adopt a different lens that can actually help us look deeper and in a way that is critical, and then, as Bruno pointed out, to move to action. And I think tonight, of course, our thoughts also go to the suffering mothers and children in Gaza who are suffering the way in which our economic system actually operates. Again, even the genocide cannot be understood separately from the economic forces, and even the explicit starvation campaign that for now 3 months, there's complete siege in the area and children are starving. We need to take responsibility as citizens of the world to try to connect the dots. And so we are here tonight to do exactly this on a topic that will really, I think, be illuminated. Suffice to say that I read from the wonderful book that you can buy here of Kirsten, Mullen, and Sandy Darity, that the big wealth accumulation in this country really descends and was built on the legacy of slavery, on the legacy of legal apartheid and Jim Crow, and on the current injustices, especially in the justice system that Dr. Crutcher has been deeply involved in trying to change. So everything is connected. Aetna, Lehman Brothers, JP Morgan. If you read the book, you will discover how their wealth was founded on the slave trade. So without further ado, what I'm gonna do is introduce the first speaker, and then I will introduce them in turn so as to give more relevance to their bios. So first of all, we have Kirsten Mullen, who's here with us. folklorist and the founder of Artifactual, an arts consulting practice, and Carolina Circuit Writers, a literary consortium that brings expressive writers of color to the Carolinas. She participated in the design of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and she was a consultant for North Carolina Museum of History's Civil Rights Exhibition project. As faculty member with the Community Folk Life Documentation Institute, she trained students to research and record the state's African American music heritage. Her writings include Queen Mother, a profile of Black nationalist and reparation advocate Queen Mother Audley Moore, who you can read more about also in their book, and Black Culture and History Matters in the American Prospect, which examines the politics of funding Black cultural institutions. She and Sandy Darity, by her side, are co-editors of the Reparations Project, a handbook for racial justice, came out in 2023 with the University of California, and the authors of From Here to Equality, Reparations from Black Americans in the 21st Century. And this book is available with us in its current paperback form. Both books were recipient of multiple awards. For example, the 2021 book prize from the Association of African American Life History, the Lillian Smith Book Prize, and the American Book Award for Social Change, and many more. So the word to you, Kirsten, and I know actually Sandy is going to speak right after, so maybe I can, at this point, present him as well. Professor Sandy Darity is Samuel Du Bois Cook Professor of Public Policy, African and American Studies and Economics, and the director of the Samuel Du Bois Cook Center on Social Equality at Duke University. He's the founding father of stratification economics, a subfield launched in 2005 within economics that focuses on how structural inequalities, especially those related to race, class, and gender, are maintained and reproduced over time. Darity's research focuses on inequality by race, class, and ethnicity, schooling, and the racial achievement gap, the Atlantean slave trade and the Industrial Revolution, the history of economics, and the social psychological effects of exposure to unemployment. Darity has received important recognition. In 2022, he became the Du Bois Fellow of the American Academy of Political and Social Science, and he became the Fellow of the National Academy of Social Insurance in 2021. He received the Samuel Westfield Award for the National Economic Association in 2012. So we have really recognized scholars and thinkers, and the word to you now, and I will present Dr. Crutcher in due course.
So Sandy's going to start with an enumeration of the harms and a summary approach that led to the arrival of the racial wealth gap, right? And why we prefer the summary approach. That first topic also will include the magnitude of the racial wealth gap, how it came about, how it's maintained, and then I will tag team and talk about the 4 pillars that we believe are necessary for a Black reparations project and why H.R. 40, the only legislation that's been introduced to Congress that focuses on Black reparations, will not get the job done and must be scrapped or substantially rewritten. Then I will lay out some other roadblocks and brick walls, basically, to Black reparations, and why we say that state and local plans are incomplete, inconsistent, and inequitable. And then lastly, we're going to leave you with some talking points, right? So hopefully that you'll receive those as sort of thoughtful analysis for those of you who want to go forward and push for reparations that we have found useful. So first of all, the racial wealth gap. Sandy.
Thank you. Thank you, Kirsten. So I'd like to jump right in on this and launch us with a discussion of the ways in which we might determine the size of a reparations bill, a bill for what is owed to Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. And we're going to argue that there are 2 main approaches. The first approach is to enumerate harms, and the second approach is to arrive at a summary measure. By enumeration of harms, we mean identifying the atrocities that have been inflicted upon Black Americans, assigning a dollar value to each, and then adding it up to come to a total sum. These atrocities can include mass incarceration, the racialized use of eminent domain, residential segregation, lynchings and massacres, health disparities, and discrimination in employment. In contrast, the summary measure provides us with a single indicator of the damages that have been inflicted upon living Black descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. And for a number of reasons, and I think we'll elaborate on this in greater depth as the afternoon proceeds, we settled upon the racial wealth gap as the summary measure that we thought or think is most useful in this context. In the 2022 Survey of Consumer Finances, the Federal Reserve reports that the difference in average household wealth between Black and white households in the United States is $1.15 million. If we were to compute that on the basis of a per person estimate, adjusting for household size, this would come to approximately $400,000 per person. We estimate that in a country where there's approximately 47 million Americans who self-identify as Black, approximately 40 million would be the number of individuals who would have ancestors who were enslaved in the United States. So if we multiply 40 million by $400,000, we come up with the national bill of $16 trillion. And we argue, and Kirsten's going to elaborate on this more, that that meeting this bill is necessarily a federal project. To illustrate, let's consider the prospect of the state of Oklahoma addressing the question of the racial wealth gap for its own Black residents. So it's estimated that there are about 300,000 Black Oklahomans. Let's say conservatively that only 200,000 of them would be eligible for reparations. At this $400,000 rate, that means that Oklahoma would need to meet a bill of $80 billion for its Black residents. And again, let me say that that's based upon a conservative estimate of the number of folks who would be eligible. $80 billion to meet that task, but the state's budget is $12.6 billion. Let's consider Tulsa itself. Well, Tulsa has close to 60,000 Black residents. Let's say 40,000 of them would be eligible for reparations. If your objective is to close the racial wealth gap, then that would be an expense of $16 billion in a city whose annual budget is less than $1.5 billion. So this is a foreshadowing of a deeper set of issues associated with the notion that you could conduct a reparations plan at the state and local level. I also want to turn to the state of California because that's a state in which they have already had a major task force that has generated a report. In the context of California, Kirsten and I both served as pro bono consultants to the Department of Justice's team that supported the task force and then eventually to the task force itself. California has approximately 2 million Black residents. Let's say very conservatively, again, half of those individuals would be eligible for a reparations payment. If that reparations payment was predicated on closing the racial wealth gap, it would constitute an expense of $400 billion in a state in which their total annual budget is less than $350 billion. Now, the California Task Force recognized this limitation, and as a consequence, they chose the enumeration of harms approach rather than the summary measure approach. They sought to be fairly comprehensive, and when their calculations were completed, the irony is that they ultimately had an amount that was in excess of what would be needed to close the racial wealth gap for 1 million of the state's black residents. So as a consequence, we emphasize the importance of using the summary measure strategy, and in particular, the racial wealth gap. There are some other problems with the enumeration of harms approach. First is, can you truly be comprehensive and accurate? The reason why we raise this question is if we think specifically about the Tulsa massacre, we still do not have a precise accounting for the names and identities of the persons murdered by the white mob. And that is also true in other cities across the country where similar types of massacres took place. Moreover, are we able to account for all of the relevant atrocities? Furthermore, are we able to account for all the ramifications of those atrocities? So for example, if we think about these massacres, and actually there was approximately 100 that took place between the end of the Civil War and World War II. If we think about these massacres, in virtually every instance, they produced a refugee population. In some instances, they were the cause of certain communities becoming all white, okay? And so what do you do about the individuals and their descendants who live in other parts of the country besides the locality where the atrocity took place? Local reparations will not reach the full range of individuals who should be compensated. Another difficulty is establishing the relationship between each past atrocity and the damages experienced by living descendants of those who had been subjected to the atrocity. For example, estimates of the present value of the cost of enslavement to those directly subjected to bondage run into the quadrillions. But it can be asked legitimately, is that what is due to living descendants of the persons who were held in bondage? And our answer is no, it is not. The racial wealth gap, on the other hand, captures the cumulative intergenerational effects of white racism on living Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. The story of how the gap came about is something that Kirsten is going to talk about in greater detail. But the key point is that the central source of wealth in this society for households and for individuals is the transmission of resources across generations. White families with significant support from the United States government have had substantially more to give to their children and grandchildren than Black families who were not given the same asset building handouts.
So I'm going to talk about the 4 pillars, right? So from our perspective, a proper reparations program must specify 4 things, 4 pillars. Who is eligible to receive reparations? How much should be paid? Who should pay? And what form the payment should take, okay? So specify who is eligible, how much should be paid, who should pay, and what form the payment should take. So the first pillar, eligibility. Care and precision are essential in establishing eligibility for reparations. The term African American, for example, needs exact definition since there are white Americans who can claim African descent and an enslaved ancestor, and they would otherwise qualify.
About 50 of them just came here.
Right? Okay. So the condition of being a descendant of, quote, the institution of slavery should specify, first of all, slavery in the United States, since this is a project for Black descendants of persons emancipated by the 13th Amendment and the Civil War. Okay? That's a distinction that we make in our proposal. All right. We recommend the following criteria for eligibility. First, The recipients must be individuals who can meet a lineage standard and an identity standard. And by that we mean claimants must be able to trace their ancestry to a person who was enslaved in the United States. We further propose that the federal government create an agency that is staffed by professional genealogists who would who would provide their services for free to any individuals who were attempting to make a claim, okay? But recipients also must be individuals who have self-identified as Black, African American, Afro-American, or Negro at least 12 years prior to the establishment of a Reparations Study Commission or a reparations program, whichever came first. So you can't wake up and be Black tomorrow and qualify. All right. Both criteria must be met. There are living descendants of the freedmen who were promised and denied 40-acre land grants as restitution for the years of bondage. This denial was the foundation of today's racial wealth gap, as we're talking about. It's also the foundation for the debt owed to living Black descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. The second pillar, how much should be paid? At the core of a plan for reparations for Black American descendants of persons enslaved in the United States must be at least an expenditure sufficient to eliminate the racial wealth gap. The wealth gap is a product of federal policies, deliberate actions the nation's government took that disadvantaged Black Americans while advantaging white Americans. First was the failure to provide the formerly enslaved with any restitution, despite the promise of 40-acre land grants, while under the terms of the Homestead Act of 1862, 1.5 million white families received not 40-acre land grants, but 160-acre land grants apiece. Now, this was land that was in the Western Territories, right? This is land that helped the federal government complete its colonial settler project. That single federal policy is currently benefiting more than 4.5 living white individuals.
45 million.
Yes, more than 45, no decimal point. Yeah. More than 45 million living white individuals. Let me say it again. That single policy is currently benefiting more than 45 million white individuals. So in addition, there followed nearly a century of legal segregation, inclusive of the 100 massacres that Sandy mentioned briefly, conducted by white terrorists, resulting not only in murder of Black people, but also the theft of Black-owned property. Right. Furthermore, in the 20th century, the federal government's asset-building practices shifted from land redistribution to promotion of homeownership, but does so on a highly discriminatory basis, extending from the New Deal era initiated redlining phenomena to the prejudicial application of home buying support programs under the GI Bill. So actually, both of our fathers received the GI Bill, but they got the GI Bill for education. No money to buy a house, no money to buy a business, no money to buy a farm. Right. No asset. All right. Fourth was the combination of the federal highway system, so-called urban renewal, or as in my neighborhood, Negro removal, that's what we called it. That led to the destruction of Black neighborhoods and Black businesses and Black business districts nationwide. We established that it will require at least $16 trillion to close the racial wealth gap, and that standard should set the minimum amount of any reparations plan. It is an expenditure that must be conducted by the federal government, not only due to its culpability, but also because it is the only level of government capable of meeting the task. So local and state reparations will necessarily be incomplete, inconsistent, and inequitable. Incomplete because state and municipalities do not have the ability to meet the minimum standard. The combined budgets, as Sandy said, of all cities and towns and states in the United States, some 107,000 jurisdictions, are less than $6 trillion. Funds used to meet all the needs of their constituents, a sum that falls far short of the $16 trillion target. Inconsistent, because the individual city and local projects are uncoordinated and they're decentralized. They're inequitable because they are not uniform. In addition, they pose the additional danger that, incomplete as they are, they will be treated as sufficient by some, making federal actions unnecessary. The one exception to our objection to local reparations is that of Washington, D.C. Since the district is under direct authority of the federal government, its citywide spending is not constrained by its own tax revenues, like all other states and municipalities. In fact, the federal government could establish and fund in its entirety a plan for reparations for Black Americans whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States, who reside in the district, as a precedent for a comprehensive national project. In 1862, during the Civil War, Congress actually instituted something called compensated emancipation, a program in the District of Columbia. How many people know about that? Raise your hands. One person. Thank you. All right. You need to question the people who publish your textbooks. The federal government declared slavery illegal in the district and agreed to pay slaveholders $300 for each of their human properties as remuneration. President Lincoln hoped the district's example would persuade slaveholders across the nation to accept a similar arrangement and consequently bring about an end to the Civil War. The nation could have emerged from the policy both with an abbreviated internal armed conflict and slavery no more. But the district's example did not trigger acceptance of compensated emancipation anywhere else, not even in the border states that remained in the Union. The district is the only location in America where slaveholders received monetary reparations for their human chattel. Today, the district can seize the opportunity to launch the first phase of a comprehensive national reparations project for Black American descendants of U.S. slavery. The fourth and final pillar concerns the form reparations should take. We prioritize direct payments to eligible recipients, the same procedure used to compensate other victimized communities being subjected to atrocities. Some examples include the German government's payments to victims of the Holocaust, and the United States government's payments to Japanese Americans subjected to mass incarceration during World War II. Can I get a show of hands of people who are aware of that? Okay, hallelujah. All right. It's interesting, in 2000, there was a poll that was taken that asked, if people supported the idea of monetary reparations for Black Americans. And at the time, only 4% of white Americans agreed. I think 36% of Black Americans. No.
It's the
Majority of Black Americans. But 36% of white Americans did not think Japanese Americans should receive reparations, but in fact, they had already received them. Yeah, all right. The key features of this fourth pillar, though, is individual recipients must have full discretion over the use of the funds. Just like the members of other victimized groups receiving monetary redress, even in much larger projected amounts. For example, how many of you are aware of the Iran hostages who received reparations? 3 hands, 4 hands, okay. How much did they receive? There's a hand over here. Do you want to give a guess? All right. The Iran hostages, now these are Americans who were held hostage in Iran in 1979. This was the beginning of, what's his name? Ted Koppel's career. America held hostage. This is how many of you are way too young to remember this. But I remember being riveted to the television. This was during Jimmy Carter's presidency. He was the first president I could vote for. Usually when we vote, whoever we vote for doesn't win. But that was a rare moment when somebody we voted for, actually. I voted for one. But Iranian students seized the American embassy and detained more than 50 Americans, including the charge d'affaires and many junior staff, as hostages. These American diplomats were held for 444 days. They received $10,000 per day. Hello, that's real cheddar. For their captivity. $4.4 million each. So we have the...
And just an aside, not from the Iranian government.
That was from the American government. Yes, the US government. All right. So we have the ability to do these things. The question is, when do we exercise the will to make it happen? All right. So in addition to local so-called reparations, another detour from true reparations is H.R. 40. Right? This is legislation that will not eliminate the racial wealth gap. So even if the legislation passes, it's highly unlikely to deliver the true reparations. On the contrary, it could undermine the whole project. Even if the president were to appoint a commission, it will not give us true reparations if it's modeled after H.R. 40. So let's talk about H.R. 40 for a minute. So H.R. 40 calls for the creation of a U.S. congressional commission to study and develop proposals while offering direction on how to proceed. Reparations could end up defined as anything from an elaborate apology to the endorsement of piecemeal and woefully inadequate measures, such as Vermont's effort that invites white people to donate cash to black people who sign up to receive it, or the project in Evanston, Illinois, initially a housing program funded only, a housing voucher program, I should say, funding only at $400,000 with funds from the cannabis tax. So they encouraged more people to smoke marijuana so black people could get their reparations. It's a little twisted. The idea, though, was to compensate these black people in the town for who had been discriminated against in the housing market from 1919 to 1969 at the rate of $25,000 each. Now, the average cost of a house in Evanston, Illinois is about $463,000. So it's not real clear to me how far that $25,000 is going to go. And initially, the money only could be used for the repair or maintenance of a house that you currently own. So if you were a renter whose family had been discriminated against, you were not eligible. If your family had been priced out of the housing market and you left Evanston, you were not eligible. And we learned that the money did not go directly to the individuals who qualified, but to the banks. And it turns out that the 3 banks they picked were, wait for it, the same banks who discriminated against their parents and grandparents. Wow. All right. That's the Evanston Project. All right. So they have now revised that project in a good way. It's still a housing voucher project, but now you can use the funds as you choose, but you still have to be an Evanston resident to qualify for it. The other interesting piece, though, is that the window for applying, it was either 2021 or 2022, I should look this up, was from February to November. 9 months. I have no idea how robust their efforts were to track down all of the people who were potentially eligible for after 50 years of housing discrimination. But the window's closed. So no matter what, there will be no more applicants to the Evanston Project. That's not what we call reparations. Okay? When H.R. 40 emerged from the House Judiciary markup session in April 2022, it contained numerous structural flaws. Among other things, the commission would be exempt from the Federal Advisory Committee Act, which ensures transparency in the form of public hearings, agendas, and periodic reports. How many of you have read H.R. 40? Read the document. Read the document. It doesn't say, we hadn't read it 10 years ago. True confession. And we were shocked to see what it said. It's like, oh my gosh. Oddly, only 7 of the commission's 15 members constitute a quorum. Not a supermajority, not even a majority. What's up with that? And the administrative director would have the authority to appoint 6 members, if they chose, from the majority, for the major civil society and reparations organizations. So the commission's director, who's not appointed by an elected official, him or herself can choose the 6 people who could become the majority. Interesting. Okay. No elected officials would be allowed to serve, and these kinds of commissions almost always have members of Congress serving, but no elected officials are allowed to serve on this commission for H.R. 40. Not even a governor, no mayors, period. People who are accountable to the public by law are not allowed to serve. Okay. Members would earn salaries up to $175,000 a year. I mean, you almost feel like the people who drafted and revised H.R. 40 really did not believe that reparations was going to happen for Black American descendants of U.S. slavery, but they wanted to make sure the people who served on this commission got theirs. Okay. So the potential outcome could be an obscure, unrepresentative process in which co-opted members reach an unsatisfactory result, potentially discrediting the very concept. A proper reparations program should rest on the 4 pillars we have described here. There's nothing in H.R. 40 in its current incarnation that will ensure the conditions of a true reparations are met. H.R. 40 should be scrapped. America deserves legislation based on strong moral principle. A congressional mandate is needed to guide the nation in the payment of a debt that is already 160 years overdue.
Thank you so much to both. I think what is fascinating about your book that you can find here again, From Here to Equality, is the capacity to connect these concrete solutions and critique of the historical solutions with an explanation of what has happened to lead us to where we are. So that element of historical depth absolutely gives us a sense that the current struggles for reparations are struggles that are not, of course, technical, but deeply political. And these struggles require, in fact, a vision that doesn't reduce the problem of wealth inequality and income inequality and inequality in education and access to healthcare and access to justice to individual deficiency. And this is a very important, I think, intuition from the book, is that economics, as it's done in a standard way, tends to focus on individual actions. So it's called methodological individualism. It all boils down to people's capacity to behave in a certain way and thus make one's way up. Now, what is important in your book, I think, is that you really show how it's this focus on individual behavior and on flawed behavior is, of course, the very base of the prejudice that tells us that the reason why Black Americans are poorer and more marginalized is because of their own fault. And this guilt tripping is actually very much connected with the guilt tripping, not just of racial discrimination, but of class discrimination. So the importance of actually saying it's actually an institutional construction. This happens out of institutional historical construction deeply connected to the very way in which wealth is accumulated in our country is absolutely focal. So before passing the word to Tiffany, I just wanted to ask Sandy if you could say a couple words, given that you are the founding father of stratification economics that really tries to grapple with the very difficult question of the relation between class, gender, and race. If you could maybe focus a couple of thoughts on how your book shows the deep relation between class and race, and how this informs then, of course, the question about what to do and how to do reparations in a way that is actually constructive.
Well, I'm not sure. I think that one of the critical dimensions of what you referred to as stratification economics is the presumption that the reason and why we have racial prejudice is not just simply because people are psychopathological or irrational, but that there's actual material benefits that are associated with holding those kinds of beliefs and acting out of those types of beliefs, which is what makes it potentially so very, very difficult to erase racism. Racism is not something that is kind of flippantly arbitrary. It has a purpose and a function. And we, as a consequence, if we were to try to eradicate racism, there is a segment of the population that would have to accept a change in their status and position. And so this is, I think, one of the central messages of stratification economics. I will say something that may depart a bit from the comments that were made at the beginning of the session, though. Stratification economics presumes that the phenomenon of racism, and it's more general than black-white relationships. One could argue that racism is operative in the Middle East. One could argue that racism was operative in Rwanda and Burundi. One could argue that racism was operative in the context of the genocides that took place in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So racism is not specific to the black-white relationship. It's something that's more general. But I would also argue it's not necessarily specific to capitalism. And the argument that we make in the context of stratification economics is that any society that is significantly hierarchical is one in which racism is likely to emerge because there are benefits to capturing the dominant positions in the society. And the use of race prejudice operates as a mechanism for rationalizing what we observe in the way in which these hierarchies are racialized. So there's an intersection between class and race in the sense that the conditions of class distinction motivate racism. And so that's a somewhat different position than I think many people take.
Thank you. That was very illuminating. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. So we have the very big pleasure of having with us Dr. Crutcher, who I think is really able to speak firsthand through her lived experience as an organizer and a citizen of Tulsa, to the connection between the three phases that Sandy and Kirsten talk about in the book, which is, again, making sure that slavery is not separable from the further phase of, as I already said, American apartheid, and then the further phase of the constant discrimination in the criminal justice system. And so ultimately how this understanding of reparation is much more holistic, looks at the whole and looks at the present as inseparable from this past. So Dr. Crutcher is very, very much a champion in the struggle against systemic inequality and for social justice. Her life and work have become a testament to resilience, empowerment, and the pursuit of justice, fueled by personal tragedy and a deep-rooted desire to create a positive change. Dr. Crutcher's journey into the spotlight began under the most tragic of circumstances, the death of her twin brother, Terrence Crutcher, who was killed by the police officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, while unarmed and with his hands in the air. The death of Terrence Crutcher, which occurred in September 2016, marked a pivotal moment in Dr. Crutcher's life, catapulting her into an international platform where she has become a leading voice in the fight against police brutality and racial injustice. Tiffany founded the Terrence Crutcher Foundation, an organization dedicated to addressing issues of criminal justice reform, racial inequality, and community empowerment. I was also very much struck on how you have experience also on healthcare discrimination when you were in Alabama, and the connection between healthcare discrimination and educational discrimination, and how you've been working with the youth here in town as well. Dr. Crutcher serves on the boards of Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, Historic Greenwood Main Street, Justice for Greenwood Foundation, and Thunder Fellow and Black Tech Street. These organizations, along with many others, are working to reshape Tulsa's future, honor in history, and provide opportunities for Black residents to thrive in the face of historical adversity. Dr. Crutcher has been widely recognized with many prizes, including the 2025, you were named Oklahoma's most powerful and influential African American by the Black Chronicle magazine. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. You know, after listening to Sandy and Kirsten, if I was in a Black church, I would run and shout and jump. Just amazing. And everything we thought we were doing right in Tulsa, all of the progress to fight for repair and respect and restitution, you all just poked holes in every single thing that we're doing. You really did. Raise your hand if you believe that. I know we have some people here from the Beyond Apology Commission. Stand up. I think I saw Greg Taylor. There he is right there. I mean, they just poked holes in the plan, Greg. Yeah, if you're a descendant, would you please just stand? I want to recognize any descendants that are in the room. Give them a hand, absolutely. And I see so many just familiar faces and friends and supporters who's, you know, really walked alongside us here in Tulsa for our fight, you know, against police brutality, justice, and liberation. I have my sister-in-law here, Tanya Crutcher. Just wave your hand, give her a hand. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge people from my team, the Terrence Crutcher Foundation, and our volunteers, Sarah Fletcher and Kenneth K. Rock Brandt. All I can say is, wow, you know, I'm Tiffany Crutcher, and I've found myself at the intersection of 3 real-time simultaneous fights. The fight for Greenwood, the fight for Terrence Crutcher, in the fight for Creek Freedman. I am a descendant of a Creek Freedman. My 2-time great-grandfather, Jesse Norris, was put on the Dawes roll. And we are literally fighting right now at the Muskogee Creek Nation. On June 10th, we will be at the Muskogee Creek Nation Supreme Court fighting for our citizenship, where the freedmen were kicked out of the tribes in 1977, violating the treaties of 1866. Of course, when we think about the massacre, my great-grandmother, Rebecca Brown Crutcher, had to flee in fear of her life. Dr. Darity, not as an immigrant, but as a refugee, as you stated. And then, of course, in 2016, my twin brother, Terrence Crutcher, was shot and killed with his hands in the air. For those of you who don't know, we went through a rigorous criminal trial in 2017. For the first time in the history of Tulsa, a police officer was indicted. Betty Shelby was indicted, and after 9 hours of a jury deliberating, they found her not guilty. It wasn't because she wasn't guilty. The jury penned a letter to the verdict and said, we believe that she should never be a patrol officer again, and she's not blameless. But because of the way the laws are written, because of the way we were advised, we have to render this verdict. And that was another shot fired for us. We went, of course, to the Department of Justice and the federal government. They came back and said that the statute was just too strict to prove that she acted willfully. And so they dismissed that case. And so this past Wednesday, May 14th, we found ourselves at the 10th Circuit in Denver, Colorado, where we argued our case because a federal judge for our civil trial dismissed the city of Tulsa, dismissed Betty Shelby, so we ended up in an appeal. We just argued the case, and we feel very confident that we will get kicked back down and go through a civil process on the basis of qualified immunity. Yes. And I think what's daunting about that is that we're talking about almost 9 years later. Almost 9 years later, we have not stopped fighting the systemic racism, the anti-Black racism, the oppression that killed Terrence Crutcher. And so we started this foundation in his name with the understanding that we can't bring Terrence back, but we can fight like hell to make sure that what happened to Terrence doesn't happen to Terrence Jr. And so when we talk about the harms that occurred, and I'm just speaking in the context of Tulsa back in 1921, I've drawn very stark parallels of what happened to Terrence almost 100 years later. Mobs of white rioters killing innocent, unarmed Black men with their hands in the air. Dr. A.C. Jackson killed right in his front yard. No one rendered first aid. No repair or restitution has been provided. Airplanes loomed and dropped bombs on its own country for the first time in history, and no repair. And we're still fighting. And I'm gonna talk about where do we go from here. But when you compare that to what happened to Terrence, a mob of white police officers fled to the scene. A helicopter loomed in the air, and the police officer said he looked like a bad dude. He was shot and tased simultaneously. No first aid was rendered. There's been no repair, no respect, no restitution. The same culture, the same police department, 100 years later, very stark parallels. And so when I think about the fight for Terrence, the fight for Black Creeks, the fight for Greenwood, that trifecta has traumatized my family. Generational trauma has reverberated through my family's history. So I submit to you two that I believe that I'm owed $16 trillion. And so where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? What's the call to action? We always say, once you know, you owe. And I love this 4-point plan where we talk about direct payments. If we even talk about direct payments, lawsuits are gonna happen. Lawsuits are gonna happen. If we even talk about full discretion over the funds, we have people within our own community who are saying, well, what are they gonna do with it? You know, we had people wanting to give the survivors money. Our survivor's mother, Leslie Benningfield Randall, who's 110, Mother Viola Fletcher, who just turned 111 on May 10th, you can clap for that, 111 years old. And there were people wanting to give them money. And some people posed the question, well, why do they need that much money? They're gonna die soon. This was 5 years ago, you all. They were 105. They're not going anywhere. And that is the harm, or the continued harm, that we hear over and over again, where the dominant culture, the dominant race poses that question, what are you gonna do with it? And so when I think about the Beyond Apology Commission, Greg Taylor, I think about how that was set up. I think about how the past mayor, Mayor G.T. Bynum, said on his way out the door, I'm gonna finally create this commission, even though he said, I believe that reparations are divisive, even though we know that his family owned slaves. We know these are facts. I'm not, even though I believe that the mass graves digs are re-traumatizing descendants over and over again, where descendants were left out of the cemetery, standing outside of the gate. We couldn't even pray. We couldn't even re-intern people that could be my ancestor, that could be Tyrence's ancestor, that could be Heather's ancestor, and they allowed city officials, white people in, they prayed. I'm talking about re-traumatizing a community over and over again. And so this commission, or Beyond Apology Commission, was established, attached with an executive order saying you can only make recommendations on housing, similar to Evanston. So they're telling us that you can only do this. We're gonna move beyond apology. And so, Greg, we know we have work to do. And I took issue with that when it was the very mayor who went on national TV, CBS Sunday Morning News, who said that Terrence all but committed suicide, and I'm paraphrasing. You can go look it up. It wasn't about race, but it was about the insidious use of drugs, is what he said. On national TV. The same mayor that fought the living survivors, and then on his way out, well, let's establish a commission. Oh, the harm, the psychological harm. And for the city's attorneys to say in the courtroom that these survivors didn't experience the harm, it wasn't Mother Randall, it was her parents in front of them. And so you're poking holes in the work that we're doing here in Tulsa. Let's talk about Justice for Greenwood and the recommendations that we've made to the mayor. We've asked for direct payments and direct compensation, so I think we're on the right track there. We've asked for a trust to be created. We've asked for scholarships for descendants. We've asked for tax abatement. We've asked for small business grants for descendants. We've asked for grants for the surviving churches to preserve and restore those historic entities. And we've asked for all of the records. To your point, Sandy, we don't have an accurate accounting. We've asked for all of the records to be released. Now, I will say that we elected Tulsa's first Black mayor. And this mayor, Mayor Monroe Nichols, on June 1st, will roll out his plan for repair. We don't know what it's gonna look like, but there's been several community groups that's provided him with recommendations, including the Beyond Apology Commission. And on June 1st, which he has declared a local day of observance, a local holiday, and we gotta move beyond symbolism too, right? But we'll take that, because my story was erased from the history book. I didn't know about it when I went to Carver, Tanya. I didn't learn about it when I went to Booker T. Washington. And so for him to make June 1st a local day of observance, a local day of service, a local day to honor and show deference to us is huge. And I respect that. But he also said that he would release 40,000 pages of records that's been under seal for the last 100 years. And so we believe that if this mayor implements significant components of the recommendations from Beyond Apology, from the community advocacy groups, that Our plan right here in Tulsa will be one of the most comprehensive local plans that the nation has seen. We truly believe that. Will it close the wealth gap? Based on the numbers you all just rattled off, probably not, but will it stop the bleeding? And is it a start? Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. And so we believe that if we can get it right in Tulsa, we can get it right everywhere, because Tulsa is the microcosm of what's happening across this country. We have pictures. We have living survivors. We have 1,000 descendants in our network right now who are working with genealogists to trace their lineage and to see where they come from, because we believe that every child deserves to know who they are and where they come from. And so I will just say this, that the advocates in this city, we don't take injustice lying down lightly. We come from Black excellence. We come from a community that's resilient. And we've actually taken on the founding principles of the founders of Greenwood. And those founding principles, number 1 was resilience. Number 2 was community love. Greenwood is the greatest love story that our nation has ever known. Number 3 is wealth and education. Number 4 is ownership. And number 5 is self-determination. And the work that we do with the Terrence Crutcher Foundation, with Black Tech Street, with Justice for Greenwood, with Black History Saturdays, with Deep Greenwood, our work is guided by those principles. And that's why we continue to rise from the ashes over and over and over again. And so to my white allies, to my friends, once you know you owe, how can you use your voice to move beyond apology, to move beyond this notion of asking questions, what are you gonna do with it, and act? And I will tell you that we have to act, because action changes things. And so I'll just stop right there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Alrighty, so what we're going to do now is open it to dialogue. We have a station right there if you want to ask a question. I know there's a couple of you from the community that would like to give testimony to other local initiatives. I would just like to say before we start doing that is that we do have time to enjoy some food together on the terrace for the first time. So I hope you can stay around to connect with people and, you know, create community, as this is part of the spirit of the Che, is also to create a space where people can meet and interact and potentially keep organizing together. We do also have a Friends of Che group that meets. We will meet tomorrow at 4 p.m. at 473 in Candlewoodier. If you want to come, what's the name of the bar? 473, I said it right. So the idea again is to develop these conversations in a deeper way so that we can continue discussing and continue building community. I also wanted to say that there is a very interesting talk with Professor Robin Kelly coming up. It's either the 28th or the 29th. Does anyone know of May? I was trying to check it, but I didn't have my phone. Robin Kelly is a wonderful historian from LA, and so I hope you can join that conversation as well. And that is all from me, and the word to you and to the conversation.
Hey, can everybody hear me? Okay, so I'm Terrence Billingsley. I'm a descendant of Greenwood, and I'm the founder and executive director of Black Tech Street. So our organization is working to rebirth historic Black Wall Street as a premier innovation economy rooted in AI and cybersecurity. First and foremost, I want to say I can attest to the incredible work Dr. Crutcher and the foundation has done. So I think she deserves another round of applause because she's done an incredible job. I also want to say that this has been one of the most informative sessions I've ever really had on reparations, and I have some tough questions. One tough question, well, multiple, but I'm gonna just leave it at one because I'm sure other people got questions. I agree with everything that y'all have said about the federal government and its culpability, and I agree that reparations is owed. But a reality that's starting to set in, I mean, that has always been true, but that I think we have to tackle is there are social dynamics and societal dynamics that pre-exist that have to be taken into account anytime we try to enact something. The kind of federal reparations plan that is deserved, I want to say that is deserved. We're seeing now how even just a broad cultural perception of DEI has caused that was not backed by any tangible legislation, has caused a massive backlash inherently in our country in a way that really helps to threaten the existential integrity of our nation. I know it's not simply DEI, there's a multitude of factors, but that has become a rallying cry. If something as simple as the idea of DEI has the power to destabilize our nation due to pushback from certain people, how could a comprehensive federal plan, and this is why I think there's a little bit to be talked about a federal approach versus a local approach, how could a comprehensive federal plan like the one we are putting forward, A, how is it feasible, and B, how would it not cause a level of unrest that I don't know that this nation would survive?
I'm Heather Nash. I'm the executive director for Deep Greenwood Foundation. We're an organization that was started by a bunch of descendants who kind of felt left out back in 2021. So we started Deep. It was actually the Greenwood Project, and we changed the name this year to Deep Greenwood Foundation. But our organization is focused on two things. The two things that we're focused on is preserving the force structures that are left that are connected to Greenwood in 1921, which is those buildings at Archer and Greenwood, which is owned by the oldest black chamber in the country. It'll be 100 years old next year, which is the Greenwood Chamber of Commerce. And then Vernon AME Church, Mabel B. Little House, Heritage House, and Mount Zion Baptist Church. So we're working to make sure that those buildings are preserved because the city of Tulsa gets a lot of travel and tourism money for Greenwood, but we're not even listed in the top 10 reasons for why people come to Tulsa. And we know that's a lie. The people come to Greenwood over going to Gathering Place, but that was in the top 10. The other thing that we're focusing on is certifying descendants. I'm a descendant. My grandmother was Ruth Dean Nash. She was 7 years old when it happened. She was certified by Eddie Faye Gates in 2001, along with 117 other survivors. Those survivors are certified through the state of Oklahoma. So our other mission is to make sure that those descendants are certified that are connected to that 118, but also those who passed away before Eddie Faye Gates could get to them to certify them. So those are the two things that the Deep Greenwood Foundation is focusing on. We also, excuse me, I'm a little nervous, and I'm a little, and my son just told me some good news. He's in the state playing tennis right now, so he won. So, so I'm a little nervous and happy too. But the other thing is, we want to make sure that Greenwood is preserved by us. So one of our things in our restitution plan that we wrote, we actually met with the mayor. We gave him our restitution plan as well. What we wrote is we want to make sure that we preserve. Black people continue to give our stuff to agencies like the Smithsonian. We need to man our own things, maintain those things. Look what Trump is doing today to this historical agency. So we want to do that. That's another big thing that we're focused on as well, is being able to learn. We can train our own kids. One of the key things that I want people to know about us, people do better when they know better. A lot of times black kids don't know better because we've been living in this ugly, dark cloud in life. So I deal with a lot of kids that get in trouble a lot. And I had a kid on the list when I was looking at, he had a weird last name to me. It was Figures. And I was like, there's a Figures in that 118 people listed as certified. So I said, do you know your history? He said, no. I said, do you know if you're from Tulsa? He said, well, my family is. Called his mom, come to find out, they're related to one of those 118 people that was listed on there. Now that he knows better, he's doing better. He doesn't get in trouble. History is important to us. It kind of tells us who we are and where we come from. And a lot of black people are good people. We live good, healthy lives. And Greenwood was that. I can remember being a little girl. It's not many black people today that can tell you what Greenwood looked like. I can tell you what Mr. Cannon's store looked like in the Swindle barbershop that was on Greenwood, that was down the way that you don't even know that ever existed. But I know that. I experienced that. So those are the things we lost. So when white people, excuse me, I'll say one more thing. When white people tell us to go ahead and forget about what happened to us, remember, you all are living off those residuals that built this country that we built. So remember that. So there's a flip side to this story.
Is Carlos here? Where's Carlos? Moreno. Here you are. And then we give it back. Sorry, I just had them three and then.
So thank you. Thank you for handing me the mic. I wanted to acknowledge that this is a TU event, so I wanted to share a quote from Billy Smith, PhD, who's the director my name is Carlos Moreno. Thanks. He's a director, Billy Smith is a director of Helmer Center for American Research at Gilcrease, which is a TU establishment. He said of Eddie Faye Gates, who's been mentioned a few times tonight, who was a history teacher and a documenter of the massacre survivors and their stories. So his quote was, "Like any good scholar, educator, and historian, she understood that collective memory can help us identify the gaps, erasures, and silences in our histories, which is the first step to telling truer stories about our communities and ourselves." I wrote a chapter about Eddie Faye Gates in my book, and so I just kind of wanted to share a few words about what I mentioned in terms of reparations in my book. And so I said the conversation about reparations for the 1921 massacre began days afterward. But as a city, we're still at a stalemate as to whether they're justified. It is a collective memory and filling in the gaps in our city's cultural narratives that may bring us out of our stalemate. When we talk about reparations, we need to be very intentional about what we're asking for. What is it that we are looking to repair? Is it time for Tulsa to reimagine what it means to be a thriving city? What if terms like diversity and inclusion are insufficient? After all, having a seat at the table means nothing if you can't say anything while you're there. What would it take for Tulsa to see the value of community and support networks as Eddie Faye Gates saw them? What could we learn from the generations of Tulsans, black and white, who remember Greenwood, thank you, Ms. Nash, who remember Greenwood before its second destruction? What if instead of looking at Greenwood as the subject of pity or framing the conversation about reparations as one of shameful obligation, we might look at ourselves and what we can learn from this once diverse, thriving, and vibrant place? What would Tulsa be willing to pay for this education? What would reparations look like if we collectively sought to understand, truly understand, what we lost as a city and work together to repair it?
Wonderful. The floor is yours.
So I would like to start looking at the question that Thomas posed. So, we've been at this for 30 years, right? And I grew up in a household where people talked about those 40-acre land grants. I remember asking my grandfather, "Did we get 40 acres?" And he said, "Girl, no." I said, "Well, but what about, family members, people we knew?" And it became a thing with me. I mean, I'm sort of famous for it, for asking black people, "Did your people get 40 acres and a mule?" The only people that I know of who are black who did, actually there are two individuals that I know of, and I don't know them personally. Whoopi Goldberg's family actually did receive 40 acres. And Janetta Cole, who some of you may know was one of the presidents of Spelman College, and she was the director of the Smithsonian's African Art Museum. Sorry, so sorry, thank you. But both of them benefited from the Southern, what's the full title, Sandy? The Southern Homestead Act. Very rare, very, very, very rare. I mean, we're talking fewer than, what, 2,000?
So there were approximately 4 million people who were emancipated from slavery. If we combine the black folks who received, if we combine the black folks who received land in the United States through the federal government with the folks who received land from the so-called 5 civilized tribes in this region, it comes to less than 15,000 people. That's out of 4 million people who were enslaved. So there's a mythology that there was some significant amount of land allocation that was actually made to the formerly enslaved. Yeah.
And I'm going to say something about the folks who were here in Oklahoma. This was the, I always wondered as a kid, what did it mean to be a member of a civilized tribe? And I think, they were called civilized because they enslaved us, right? They were smart enough to enslave black people. And they also practiced agriculture. So we're talking about the Chickasaw, Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. So this was part of the Oklahoma Indian Territories, so Oklahoma was not yet a state. They fought for the Confederacy, okay? And they sent their enslaved black people to fight for the Confederacy, many of whom just crossed that line and went to the Union. But the federal government demanded that they give their enslaved black people 40-acre land grants, even though the United States government did not itself make that happen for all the enslaved people. So this is, partly why you have a Greenwood. This is why you have, black people here, who had seed money, who had a grub stake, who had property.
Yeah, you should mention that's because oil and natural gas.
Right. So not only did they have land, but many of those folks eventually discovered there was oil, gas on their property, right? And if it wasn't taken from them, they had the opportunity to profit from it. So help me get back to that. Remind me to get back to page 35. Okay. So I wanted to get back to the point that Thomas was making. About politics and what do we do about the kinds of the political will. Like, what do we do about these obstacles that we have to these projects? And I'd like you to think a bit about how history works. Like I said, we've been working on this for 30 years. In 1830, and we learned this when we were doing the research on Here to Equality, the majority of the abolition organizations in the United States were in the South. Who knew? Who knew? Over 100 of them, right? However, there was a 10-year period when members of Congress, especially the Southerners, had a tremendous amount of influence, made it illegal to even broach the subject of abolition on the floor of the House or the Senate for 10 years. Train carloads of correspondents were arriving in Washington, D.C. These people were all about social media. You talk about leafleting Tulsa. They had amazing letter-writing campaigns. Tens of thousands of people were writing to the president, writing to their congresspeople, but their voices were suppressed, just like many of our voices are being suppressed today. Right? But think about it. In 1850, there are probably very few people who thought that slavery would end in the United States. Everybody who was alive in 1850, slavery had been in existence their entire lives. It had been in existence over their grandparents' lives, their great-parents' lives. What did George Wallace say? Segregation today, segregation forever. And that was the idea. This is never going to change. This is the best thing that ever happened to white people. They weren't going to let that go. You had, people who had to do your bidding 24/7 under the pain of death. No, you're not going to let that go. Not if you don't have to. Right? 1900, very few people ever thought that women would get the right to vote. There were many, many, many men, some of whom were well thought of, who said, over my dead body. Well, they did die. And women did get the right to vote. I was part of a group of students at the University of Texas at Austin who were members of a group called ALSC, African Liberation Support Committee. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. What did I know about the continent? But I became educated about the colonization and the incredible oppression of African nations by European countries, and became really excited about this movement to help them rid themselves of European domination. We raised money, we held summer camps for kids, we rallied, we wrote petitions. It took a long time, but South Africa is no longer under apartheid. There are many other problems in South Africa, but apartheid is not one of them. Someone has to do that work to create that research so that when the moment came, it was interesting that you all, in your program, you quoted James Galbraith. He's a good friend of ours, Jamie Galbraith. And Jamie used to say, you need to do your homework. Everybody, do your homework so that when the moment comes, you'll be ready, right? You need a blueprint. Someone has to do the step-by-step process. If this happens, then what? I can remember when we would give talks and we'd get shouted down. Go back to Africa. I have a keen memory of that. And then we were in Vermont. Actually, we were just in Middlebury, Vermont. And I hadn't been there in, 20 years. And I'm looking around, I said, isn't this the place where we came? And for the first time, a young white student said, so don't get it twisted, but let's just say that reparations were possible. How would you do it? And we were just like, holy smokes, Batman. The tide is turning, right? And we got to work trying to, and not just us. There are other people who are doing this work, but we became really, really serious about what would this look like? How could it happen? And that's what needs to happen. Our colleague Bobby Donaldson, who's in the history department at the University of South Carolina, Columbia, talks about the need for action, the need to step up, the need to be counted. And people say to him, well, how do you do this? We've got so much against us. And he says, I am celebrating and honoring the sacrifice, the struggle, the murders of my ancestors. If not for them, I would not be here. That's what we're doing. We're trying to hold up that flame. But we can't do it by ourselves. So we were talking about polls earlier. So we said 4% of white Americans were against the idea of monetary reparations for black people in 2000.
No, 4%.
4%.
For it.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, it would be.
Flip the switch.
96%
were opposed. 4% were for it. Fast forward to, let's see, we're now 2025, 2024. That number jumped sevenfold, right? 28%. To 28%. It slipped a little, but sevenfold is a huge jump. It's a huge jump. Now, we don't have a crystal ball. I have no idea if the momentum will continue, but you have something to say about that. You have a role to play. So. question, so.
Well, I just have a brief comment, which is, I don't think we should preempt doing the right thing because we doubt that it will happen in near time. We have to play the long game. The folks who are in power now have played the long game very effectively. And so we need to think about how to do that. In terms of what should happen locally, I'm not sure we're that far apart, actually. There are three things that we have emphasized. The first is that local commissions and activists can engage in a process of radical truth-telling, learning what the facts are about the situation. And when you said that there's going to be the release of 40,000 pages of records, that's very, very important. Okay. The second thing is local advocates can pursue the ending of policies and practices that produce the harms. And that's what you referred to as stop the bleeding. Want to emphasize, though, that stopping the bleeding is not the same thing as compensating for the harms that have been produced by the injury. And so I think when we start talking about stopping the harm, we should not be calling that reparations. It has to be the compensation for the consequences of the harm that constitutes reparations. And then the third thing, and this may be something that is a bit different, is that we consistently say it would be wonderful if state and local advocates would commit themselves to explicitly supporting the federal effort. You can.
Oh, hang on. Sandy wanted me to mention one thing. Malcolm X has a quote that we really love, and it's in From Here to Equality. And Malcolm X said, if you push a knife in my back 9 inches, and you pull it out just 3 inches, that provides a little relief, but there's still 6 inches of blade in my back. You pull it out 6 inches, I've still got 3 inches of blade in my back. Those initial withdrawals, but partial withdrawals, are what we would call these racial equity initiatives. Atonement processes, things that cities should have been doing all along. Does the city's commissions, do the members of the city's commissions, the city council, do they look like the proportion of the people in the town? When you consult thought leaders, do they look like you, or do they look like the people whose opinions you say you value? We always say, take care of your own house first. Clean up your own house. Look at your book group, your book club. Look at your artisanal beer collective. Look at your ultimate frisbee group. Who's in that group? Are these the people you went to college with, or the people in this room? You say that the opinions of others matter to you. You say the values of others matter to you. But if you're not in communion with those people, then how do you know what their voices are? How do you know what their needs are? And I'm talking about rolling up your sleeves and saying, what do you need? Not, here's what I've got to give you, or here's what I'd like to give you. What did someone say earlier? I'm gonna co-sign, on what you do, if you do this, right? That's not partnership. That's me telling you what you're gonna do. So, I think it's really important to do that work and walk your talk.
And I'll just close really briefly. I do think that we're aligned on all three areas, Sandy. We support federal, reparations, and we have been supporting HR 40, but you just shared with us that it's flawed. So, but just know, present something that's better. Who's going to present that? Who's going to introduce legislation that hits those 4 points? I think we're all aligned with that. And so I just want to shameless plug, use my closing thoughts. Again, once you owe, May 31st, we will be commemorating the 104th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, where our organization, we lead the Black Wall Street Legacy Fest. And on June 1st, I'm not sure if you all have received the invitation, but the mayor will be rolling out his plans for, repair for our community. And so come out, support a Black organization within the Greenwood community, Greenwood North. We bought a property on the northern boundary of Greenwood. We are trying to restore that. And so we ask for your support and your prayers in helping us get that done, and come out to the Black Wall Street Legacy Fest on May 31st. Volunteer your time. And again, this has been a powerful and a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for having this.
May I say one thing? I know.
We need to get another round of questions. If you have the patience, we'll get a last round of 3 questions, very brief remarks from you, and then we close. Yes? Last round. It's just because there's a huge line, so at least we get three more. Is there a specific line, or you were in line for a while? And then...
I had a question for Tiffany. I wanted to know what your goals were for seeking reparations against Betty Shelby, what exactly it is you're aiming for, and if there's any way that the community can get involved.
And maybe present yourself.
So I'm Julie Skye, and I have a question about a source of money that's unlimited. Corporations pay money to buy what they want and pay political contributions. Have you looked at how foundations, endowments, and corporations, the people who have built their wealth on unearned wealth, have stolen from us these last 400 years? So they could write a check. Every single corporation who has benefited and is where they are today could write a check for millions of dollars. What can we do to have those people's awareness raised so they step up? And that's not a law. They could choose to do that. White people could stop white supremacy and racism. How can we go to corporate America directly?
Testing. Hi, I'm Ragza Rita. I'm a local trans woman, and I express myself gender fluid and non-binary. During the day, I'm a social worker, and in the evening and the weekends, I'm a community organizer. I have actually volunteered with Terrence Crutcher Foundation multiple times. Hello. They are great. They do these things called community walks. They give you a script, and you go out into the community, and you knock on doors, and you collect data from the community. And then you take that data back to them, and they collate it, organize it, and then they present it to city officials in order to create change. So if you want to be involved in creating change or learning how to do so, I highly suggest volunteering with them as a way to learn how to do stuff like that. I don't really have a question. For the first time ever, I came here, and everything that I felt like should have been talked about is talked about, save one thing. I am the creator and facilitator of the Tulsa Anti-Racist Support Group. We meet on the last Thursday of every month at the Dennis R. Neal Equality Center. We are an intentionally white-led anti-racist group. The person who was here before me was speaking about how white people have a responsibility to end white supremacy. White supremacy was born in our hearts and minds, and it lives there. And it is our responsibility to change that collectively and to talk about it and to have those hard conversations. So our group is a peer-led group for support and education opportunities for anybody who is trying to deconstruct racism or challenge systemic racism in their life, with an emphasis on catering to the lived experiences of white people so that white people can unpack our racism, because we need to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to read one brief statistic referring to what Heather was saying before. I just wanted to, just because I think numbers sometimes help. Black Americans are 37% of the US prison population, despite representing less than 14% of the total American population. In 2020, black people are arrested at rates twice that of white Americans. So I think these are all data points that connect well with what was being said before. Last round of thoughts, and then we close and enjoy some conversation.
So briefly, many organizations, I mean, you're in very good company for having supported H.R. 40. The U.S. Council of Mayors unanimously supported it. Ayanna Pressley, Democrat from Massachusetts, is now the lead House representative focusing on H.R. 40. What I would ask is that you formally register your withdrawal of support. Write her. Send her letters and tell her why. You know, tell her that you have learned about what H.R. 40 actually says, and this is why you disagree, and this is what you think should happen. Because members of Congress think it's fabulous. You know, we actually have had conversations with 13 members of Congress who are co-signers of the bill who confided to us that they have never read it. Now, you'd like to think that, I mean, you know, they have a lot of things to read, members of Congress, let's be real. But the expectation would be that their chiefs of staff would have read the documentation and given them a briefing. But I don't believe that's really happened. But, you know, your vote and your voice do matter. Exercise it, it's a muscle. That's one thing I wanted to say. The second piece I wanted to say had to do with the donors. And corporations. Yes, they have a lot of money, but let's think about it. $16 trillion is a lot of money. Let's say you had a collective of corporate donors who decided to commit $1 billion per month, you know, in a rotation to pay for reparations. It would take a millennium to come up with $16 trillion. We would all be long dead. They don't have it. What they could do, though, is use their muscle to push Congress for reparations. They could pay for a state-of-the-art public relations campaign. They could hit every social media target. When the fight was happening for apartheid, to end apartheid in South Africa, people all over the world got involved. They attacked the diamond mines. They attacked the voting machines. They attacked investment. At the University of Texas at Austin, where I was a student, the pensions of many state employees were invested in South African funds. There are a lot of things that you and we and corporations and foundations can do. We are appealing to them, and there are a handful that are involved in this fight. But let them know that you buy their products or you support their initiatives, and this is something you think they can do and should do.
The question was, what are my goals for reparations for what happened to Terrence? I'm just going to read this and be done. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And this is the important part, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles in organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And so reparations to me is for my nieces and nephews to have the ability to walk outside free.
So So my final comment is to complement the last thing that Kirsten said, which is not only should you invest time in informing the Congress people who are promoters of H.R. 40 that it is not a document or a bill that you can support, but also to tell them what the bill should read like. And there are alternatives that are actually in existence that people have developed as superior types of legislation that could be embraced.
Thank you so much. Scott Carter had one word, and I have
Yeah, I just got to comment. I just want to thank you, Dr. Crutcher, very well. You handled this very well. And thank you, Sandy and Kirsten, for being here. And also thank you, Heather, for speaking. I think that what we're seeing here, there is a sense of, of consternation, or I guess disquiet against, with respect, stand up, with respect to some in this community. There is differences with respect to what happens with the reparations and where this go. For example, where is the money going to go? Is it going to go to the Tulsa Community Foundation, for example? Who's going to be controlling this? And this idea, like what role is the nonprofit sector in Tulsa going to be playing in this? And what role does the community, the survivors and the descendants have in this? And I think that's what Heather was talking about here, which I hope that as we develop this at the CHE, we want this to be a place for dialogue. We want to have this dialogue in our community because I think it's an important place to have this so that we can bring these different divergent ideas out here and make some type of resolution. So thank you for that. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but we definitely walked into the middle of a conversation here, and I think that we've actually advanced that conversation. And for this, I want to thank our panel and for the questions. Thank you very much.
last final words. Are you good? Exactly. Looking forward to session 2.0. As a sequel, the date was May 29th at OSU here in town with Robin Kelly at 7 p.m. There's going to be a continuation of a very similar conversation. I got the wrong date. The Friends of Che are meeting actually on Sunday. So in case you're interested, just come talk to me. And last but not least, I would really like to thank Jisoo Park, our assistant director, who is always fundamental for these events, who is right there. And also, of course, Shiloh Hart, who has been really crucial, especially this month. I don't know where Shiloh is. Back there. Okay, anyway, and thanks to everyone, especially for coming, because this wouldn't be possible without your participation, and I hope we can stay connected and have a lot more nice conversations. The food is served in there, but then there's a beautiful terrace with some tables and chairs that you can enjoy. And of course, there's the books for sale with Magic City Books, and the authors will be available to sign briefly if they're not too tired. So it's a wonderful, wonderful book full of a lot of insights. So I hope you can take a look. Thank you.